Of course, I have my screen to share, so I just let me just see how I can share screen here. Okay, enter screen. All right, perfect. Okay, can you see my screen here? Perfect. Okay, yeah. So thanks everyone for attending this talk, and thanks for SCC for having me. So the way I want to discuss today is I'm gonna go over what smart contracts enable, right? Why do we need smart contracts? Why is they interesting to us? And then I'll be able to link why smart contracts need oracles and oracle-based networks like Chainlink to prosper, basically. So first, I want to go over things we know, right? Today, what we know very well and what you're familiar with are Web2 services. We're all very familiar with Twitter, with people use Facebook, people use Uber, people use many different Web2 services, which basically allow you to have a feature-rich system that you can easily interact with and that you can do stuff easily with, right? Like creators can upload videos on YouTube, people can watch these videos, creators can tweet stuff on Twitter, then people can look at it, they can like, they can retweet, all of this stuff, right? Now, the way these systems work behind the scenes, right, is that it's a very trust-based system. You're basically putting all of this info in a kind of a centralized part here, right, into a centralized, we could call it custodian. Here it's a custodian of information, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Apple Store, or the App Store or the Google Store. Whenever you download the app, whenever you create an app on these stores, you're putting, for the creator, you're basically putting your intellectual work onto these platforms. And for the consumers, they rely on these platforms to go and kind of consume information, right? Now, that's all fair, that's all well. The big issue we're seeing today is that these platforms have a very high counterparty risk, right? Where basically the only guarantee you get is that you trust the system not to kind of, act maliciously, basically. So you're trusting a logo, you're trusting a brand. It's a brand-based trust system, right? And basically transparency is purposefully removed because in this kind of system, a lot of time, the best option is to not be transparent because there will always be some stuff happening behind the scenes, right? Now, the other option which we see to Web2 and to these systems I'm describing is a cryptographic guarantee-based system. Bitcoin, Ethereum, you have all the things, all the kind of components in front of you. You know how the text works, you know how the security guarantees work, you know what's gonna happen, how you can be basically, in a way screwed, right, by these systems. Like, you know what can go wrong and what can go right. You're basically trusting mathematics and crypto economic incentives instead of trusting a brand and trusting a logo, And here transparency is built in. When you go onto Ethereum, when you use DeFi, you have the right to transparency. You can see everything that's happening. Nothing can be hidden, right? So that's those two systems we're comparing. We're comparing a Web2 based system, very centralized, but also very feature rich, with a blockchain based system, which is very, very kind of trustworthy, right? Like you can go onto Ethereum, you can go onto Bitcoin, you trust these systems, you know the assumptions there. However, when you compare the stuff you can do on Ethereum or the stuff you can do on Twitter, on Uber, all of this stuff, it's a big difference, right? I mean, you can't do a lot of stuff on Ethereum right off the bat. It's a siloed system. And that's where Oracle networks come in. If you look at this diagram I'm showing you, right, you basically see two things. You see trust minimization and you see feature richness. So as I went over Web2, very feature rich, very easy to access a lot of stuff. You can do anything on Web2. Blockchains, very trust minimized, very poor in features, by default. It's a siloed system. And that's why you need oracles. Now, Oracle networks like Chainlink are a way to get whatever you can't get on a blockchain right off the bat into the chain. You can get data, you can get randomness, you can get price data, event-based data like weather data. You can get anything into these chains, And what this allows is to get much more features for dApp developers and dApp consumers, right? Just like you would build Uber on a Web2 system, thanks to oracles and blockchains, you could build the same system in a more transparent way, in a more kind of decentralized way, which doesn't have all of these counterparty risks I was referring to, So that's the use for oracles. Oracles allow to build more applications. They allow more use cases. They make smart contracts really smart. So they add the smart in the contract, in my view, and they are as trust minimized as possible. So what Oracle networks like Chainlink are building is a way to get as little trust into the system as you need to. Basically, you would rely on the same crypto economic guarantees and cryptographic guarantees that you have for blockchains, right? So that's kind of the context of my talk. And now I'm going to go into a few examples to really represent that, right? So we've seen what happened recently with this, the Robinhood short squeeze, right? So that was a few months ago. People were buying up the GME stock because they thought it was undervalued and because it was getting very heavily shorted by Wall Street funds, right? So this created a huge kind of, marketing mania, and, a lot of people spoke about it. Now, what really happened at this time was that people were basically trading on this Robinhood platform, thinking the funds were theirs to use, right? They basically forgot about this stuff I'm referring to here, on the left, which is a paper guarantee-based system, which is you only have as much guarantee as you get through the brand. You don't have anything more, right? So if the brand decides that it's in their benefit to basically censor your trade, they will do it. If there is some pressure happening backdoor, or if there is some kind of, talks behind the scenes taking place, they can just cut you off, right? And this is what happened with Robinhood. Basically, all of these people who thought this was their money to use realized very rapidly that this wasn't their money to use. If you put your money on the stock market into a broker or any kind of third party, that's their money now, right? It's the same thing as not your crypto, not your keys, not your crypto, right? And that's what happened. They were basically locked off doing trades, and this created this whole thing which we all know about. And this is where we really saw the value prop of crypto and DeFi shine, right? Because what does DeFi allow? Well, DeFi, you put your money into a platform and you can transact on this platform, and you don't need anyone to agree with your trades. You don't need anyone to say, yes, you can do this or you cannot do this, right? It's fully automated, it's fully transparent, it's fully decentralized. And that's the beauty of it. So people who are trading on Robinhood and got shut off from these trades could just go on Synthetics and do the same trades without being shut down, right? And that's the beauty of DeFi. That's the solution, basically. This whole thing I was discussing with paper-based guarantees, well, you see those in information, right? Like you see that you can be censored when you post something on YouTube, or when you watch something on YouTube, or when you go on Twitter and people get banned for no reason. That's information censorship. And there is also financial censorship, which is what we saw here with Robinhood, and which happens every day in developing countries where people can't get loans and can't get, mortgages. That's financial censorships, and it does have very big consequences, probably as big as information, right? And it does restrict the flow of capital and of innovation very, very dramatically, basically. So that's why you need DeFi. And the thing with DeFi is that it does rely heavily on getting pricing data and other types of data, right? So for instance, Synthetics, if they want to price an asset, if they want to allow someone to gain exposure against gold or silver, right? They need to know the price of gold or silver. And how do they get this currently? They get this through chaining price feeds. Chaining price feeds are putting the price of gold, of silver on chain, and this allows applications to basically trade based on this price, right? Same for Aave. If I'm putting some Ether into Aave and I want to borrow some USD, I need to know what is the price of Ether against USD. And again, that's allowed through chaining price feeds. And you have many other use cases I go into, such as VRF, proof of reserve, weather data, many different systems and services which are basically acting as abstraction layers to allow the smart contract to interact with on DeFi to be really smart, to be able to know what is the price of an asset, what is the next random numbers that's going to be generated for put together, what is the weather data for insurance contract. That's what Chainlink does. Now, as you guys know, the DeFi ecosystem has grown tremendously. We're now at $102 billion, which is pretty insane. I think 1 or 2 years ago, when I was giving this talk, it was maybe a few hundred millions, right? So it keeps growing, it doesn't stop. And I think we're gonna be, by next year, probably at 10 trillion or something like this, right? Because that's exponential growth. So what we see with these applications is that they've been growing quite a lot. Synthetics, Aave, compounds, they're allowing people to have access to stuff that they never had access to. For instance, in developing countries, taking a loan was out of the question. So basically a huge fragment of society got censored from being able to do stuff that we can do on a day-to-day basis on our side, right? If I live in a poor country and I'm hitting hyperinflation and I want some exposure to gold, today I can go on synthetics and gain this exposure to gold, right? That wouldn't be possible otherwise. If I want to get a loan to, pay for a new house, I can go on to Aave, get a loan or compound. If I want insurance on all of these investments, I can go to Nexus Mutual. So that's the beauty of DeFi, and that's why it's growing so much, because there is a real product market fit, because people have been relying on these paper-based guarantees, which are very insufficient based guarantees. And today they're discovering these new cryptographic guarantees, which are much better, transparent, and open for the world. So despite all of this stuff, right, DeFi is still very small. If you look at the value compared from DeFi towards the crypto sector, it's basically a rounding error, right? It's 2.6%. It's growing, but it's still very small compared to what we think it could do. And if you put this into kind of retrospective to the rest of the world, there you see the real crazy thing, which tells us how early we are. You see that DeFi is extremely small compared to the rest of the financial sectors, right? If you go to stock market, global real estate, derivatives, DeFi is basically a very, very small, insignificant portion of all of those markets, And that's what tells us that you're still so early. And that's also what tells us that whatever we're working on is really worth working on, right? Because it's so early that even though we see all the benefits, it's still so small that it could just go away tomorrow, right? And that's why it's important for us to work on this stuff. Because if you don't have builders working on this stuff, then, something as small as what we're seeing right here disappearing is not that hard, right? And that's what really tells us that we're at the beginning of something that could be extremely important for the world, and a true shift in the way people act and use their money. Now, when we go into DeFi protocols and when we start kind of, dissecting what they're made up of, you see a very common theme, which is they have a hybrid model. They have on-chain on-chain contracts, which are basically, smart contracts deployed on Ethereum, Polygon, Arbitrum, basically the chain of your choice. And you have off-chain events. You have the smart contract execution, which needs inputs. And these inputs are very often off-chain data. So for instance, Aave needs to know the price for the liquidation of a position. They need an input, which is going to be the current price of the asset used for the collateral, right? Same for synthetics. And same for every application which is collateral-based and allowing for people to borrow against this collateral, right? If you need to have, let's say, an under-collateralized loan in the future, you will need the credit score of the person taking this loan, right? And that's where Chainlink comes in, basically giving the credit score of this person so they can take this loan. So that's the structure we're looking at. We have the on-chain part, we have the off-chain part. The off-chain part is Chainlink nodes, basically getting data from multiple different data providers based on the needs from the contract. So if the contract wants price data, we go to CoinGecko, Geico, RaveNewCoin. If the contract wants banking data, you go to Visa, MasterCard. And if the contract wants maybe signing data, DocuSign, weather data, Oracle, all of this stuff, right? So that's what we're looking at as a structure right now. Now, I want to break down the different services Chainlink has been working on, because yeah, as I was saying, the way we look at the space is you have smart contracts, you have a lot of stuff that smart contract cannot do, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do everything that smart contracts and blockchain cannot give you right now, and are basically a limiting factor, right? So, for instance, if I go right now onto some stuff we provide price and market data. The way we do this is that we have different data providers that you can see on this diagram. Basically, these providers are sourcing price data for an asset from multiple exchanges, right? So something very important we provide is we provide full market coverage for any asset. You don't want to ever be using one exchange if you want to get the price of ETH, let's say, because if the exchange goes down, you go down. And if you're securing $8 billion like Aave, you never want to go down, right? So we have multiple exchanges being sourced by multiple data providers. These providers then send their data to Chainlink nodes. Chainlink nodes, you can think of them as infrastructure provider. They're running basically blockchain infra, and they're very kind of noteworthy company, right? So for instance, we have Dutch Telecom. We have multiple kind of large Bitcoin miners, large stakers in other networks running Chainlink nodes. So basically people who have a reputation to keep their infrastructure always up. And the Chainlink nodes then puts this data from data providers onto reference contract, which then is being read by the kind of DeFi applications, right, on the right. So you have exchanges, they get into the data providers, the providers aggregate all of this data, they provide full market coverage, they send the data to Chainlink nodes, which then sends them on-chain for DeFi applications to easily read. That's how our system works right now. And you can access this data.chain.link page to see all of the price feeds we currently support. We're also currently deployed on, I think, around 10 blockchains. So you could see that we are on Ethereum, on Polygon, multiple blockchains that people can get data from, right? And then obviously these price feeds have been used for a long time and are currently securing lots of value, right? So last time I saw we had, and we don't have all the users on here, but I think we have around 200 users, something like this, for these price feeds, which are basically getting data for their applications from the Chainlink feeds. And this is securing an aggregate value of around $30 billion, give or take. So that's what today's ecosystem looks like, right? And the important thing for us when we see this value is it basically tells us that this service is useful. These applications really need this data, right? Because if you were to look at the growth of DeFi without Chainlink price feeds, I think having applications set up their own feeds and set up their own infrastructure and their own oracles would basically not be possible, right? It's like, it's like every application launching on the web having to relaunch the whole internet infrastructure. It's basically a huge amount of work, and you end up working on infra instead of working on your app as an application, right? And that's why Chainlink has been, in my view, so useful for the development of DeFi as a whole. So now that we've discussed this, I want to also emphasize what a large user base means for price feeds. The way these price feeds work is that everyone is paying, every application is paying a small amount to consume these feeds, right? So what happens is that you get pooled fees where you can have up to 50 applications, for instance, on our ETHUSD pair, paying to read from the price feed. And what this means is that all of these feeds can be aggregated, all of the user fees can be aggregated to then basically promote the security of the network, right? So let's say I collect millions of dollars in fees on a price feed. I'm able to add more nodes, more data providers. I'm able to pay more for security. And because I pay more for security, I get even more demand because my price feed is even more reliable, right? So you start getting into this loop where you increase the user fees, you get better security, you get better network and economies of scale, and you get more users, you know? And that's what you're seeing today. We're seeing a lot of applications paying for price feeds, which means all the fees are being pulled together, and all of this gets reinvested into the security, into more feeds, into building more DeFi products, right? And the other great thing we see here is that we do want DeFi to be fully decentralized and self-sustainable. So having users pay for the price feeds and having the kind of, users pay more and more of a big part for these price feeds to work means that we're going into a kind of time where the price feeds will be fully sustainable, where you won't need anyone to run these price feeds except their own users, right? And the people who will have the bigger stake in getting these price feeds running and keeping them running will be the users, because so much value relies on them. So that's a great loop we're seeing today. And we have 200 users today paying for multiple feeds. So we're really truly seeing an economic model that's fully sustainable and that's fully scalable take place in this kind of price feed model, right? So something else we're working on has been proof of reserve. And what proof of reserve is, it's basically the ability for custodians to prove their reserves for any assets they're issuing on-chain to smart contract protocols, right, to DeFi. So let me give you an example. We worked with Paxos, and Paxos is issuing Pax and PaxG as proxy assets for USD and gold, right? Now, the way we've worked with them is they have an auditing company which is providing us with an endpoint to get how much value they have in reserves on their side, right? So for gold and for dollars, we know how much they have in reserves. And we're able to put this value that they have on a smart contract on Ethereum through our Chainlink nodes. And what this allows applications to do is they can fully on-chain, they can read how much is in reserves, right? So applications, as you all know, cannot access off-chain data, but by putting this data on the chain, any application can check how much there is in reserves for Paxos. And the beautiful thing here is that an application using Pax and PaxG could check that these assets are fully collateralized. Because they could check that whatever assets they're using in their app has a real world backing. And if it doesn't, they can just have a circuit breaker, which disallows any new asset to be taken in by the application and any more exposure to be taken in, right? So the great thing is that we can actually extend this model, and people in the future will hopefully start using this proof of reserve feeds, which attest of how much you have in reserves, to base the minting condition out of this. So basically, if you don't have enough reserve, you cannot mint more assets than you have in reserve, And that's something that could be added to any custodial assets, and with which we're working to make happen, because we think it would tremendously improve the transparency of some of these assets. So basically, I cannot mint more proxy Bitcoin if I don't have enough in reserves according to the Chainlink nodes, right? Okay. All right. Yeah, guys, I think I went a bit too detailed. All right. Well, as you can see, we're doing kind of lots of new stuff for the ecosystem. I think DeFi is going to keep growing, and the services it relies on are going to keep growing. Proof of reserves and price feeds are actually our two biggest things. So I'm happy I was able to present them. And yeah, I hope you guys have an awesome event. I wish I was there with you guys, but next time. So thank you for hearing me out. Perfect. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.